Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the 6 Know-It-Alls. I'm going to take a quick minute to give some tips for our live show attendees. If you're watching this later and you're watching it on the recording, never mind these tips. Of course, if you can hear me, you're doing fine, but always join audio in the session of the webinar and always check your device volume as well. Make sure it's not muted or increase the volume. We'll use the Q&A portion for questions after the panel discussion. You can use the chat for group comments, that's fine. Let's keep the questions over in the Q&A. That's where I will look for them to ask your questions to the 6 Know-It-Alls. And if you're having trouble with the chat popping and disturbing your experience, go ahead and open the chat window and click and drag it out of the way or minimize that small window, and that'll prevent it from popping and interrupting your experience. And now we hope you enjoy the show.
Five, four, three, two, one, roll. Hi, everybody. I get to start off today with our 6 Know-It-Alls, number 5. My name is Lynn Bassett, and I am going to talk about the daily and seasonal rhythms of quilt making. Let me share my screen. Come on. I don't know why it always takes 2 clicks to get that to come up. Anyway, I'm supposed to tell you about myself. I am a freelance museum curator specializing in fashion and textiles. I was the curator of textiles and fine arts at Old Sturbridge Village from 1995 to 2000, and that is where I really nurtured my interest in early New England quilts. And so that seems to be the specialty in the world of quilting that I seem to have fallen into. And so today I'm going to talk about my diary research of early quilters between 1750 and 1850 and what that tells us about the rhythms of their quilting. I studied 34 diaries ranging in date from 1754 to 1850, and I noted all of their quilting activities, gathering 674 entries. Probably because of its association with comfort and warmth, quilting is often assumed to have been a winter activity. However, a month-by-month graphing of 331 diary entries dated between 1754 and 1800 shows that women were far more likely to be engaged in quilting in the months of May through November than they were from December through April. Note that there's a significant reduction here in the middle of the summer. That is because of haying season. Haying was just an all hands on deck activity that was absolutely exhausting for everyone. It was so exhausting that demographic historians have actually found that there's a significant reduction in the birth rate in April, 9 months after. Yeah, they weren't quilting in July. The most important thing to note in the seasonal rhythm is that they're quilting mostly in the months with days of longer sunlight. because of the need for sufficient light to see one's stitching along a faintly marked pattern. This concern is also indicated by the diarist notations that morning and afternoon, when sunlight was best, were preferred for sewing activities, while knitting is what they did in the evening when the light was poor, and they were just such expert knitters they didn't even need to see what they were doing. You may have read in a recent Blanket Statements article about a widowed quilt maker who in 1817 is believed to have inherited 25, quote, lights, comma, glass, which the author stated were used by the quilt maker to sew after dark. This is a misunderstanding of period terminology. A light was a window pane. Prior to electrification, an object providing artificial illumination was called a lamp, or of course it might be a candle. And in this image, she's actually trimming the candle wick. She's not snuffing it, as the title suggests. In 1817, the only artificial lamps available for use in the home were grease or oil lamps, the best being the argon lamp, which used whale oil generally, which is what you see here. An ordinary household would only have had one or two of these items. No one would have had 25. So it's clearly glass window panes that were being listed in that quilt maker's deceased husband's estate. And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century. Various developments in transportation, agriculture, and manufacturing brought about significant alterations in the seasonal rhythm of quilting in the 19th century. By the first half of the century, the most significant months for quilting shifted to September and October, as you can see here, and the distribution of quilting activity in the other 10 months became more evenly spread. Many factors were involved in this shift, including improved technology for manufacturing candles, which made them cheaper and much more abundant in households. And the same thing is happening in the 19th century as in the 18th century, where you see this dip in the middle of the summer because of haying. And in addition to their previous activities of keeping the garden and helping with farming, otherwise women in New England became responsible for the dairying in the 19th century. And so that was yet another added summer task that would affect the time they had for quilting and such. In the first half of the 19th century, quilting was at its height in the autumn months of September and October, the months for traditional work parties like huskings and paring bees. And Thanksgiving became the traditional time for marriages. And so I'm sure a lot of this quilting activity in the early fall was in preparation for a wedding. So this leaves us with a couple more questions. How many days in a year did my diarist quilt? And how long did it take to complete a quilt? On average, the diarist aged 30 and under noted a quilt making activity 3.3 days a year. Diarists over the age of 30 spent 2.4. Diarists who kept their daily records for decades are consistent with this observation. Once they married, their quilt making fell off considerably. It's important to note that none of these diaries show enough activity to have prepared the apocryphal 13 quilts before marriage, nor do lists prepared for the setting up of households of newlyweds show such a plethora of quilts. Bed quilts were commonly finished as quickly as possible. Several diarists noted the accomplishment of getting a quilt into the frame and quilting it off within a single day. Generally, though, it took several women working together to complete the task so quickly. And when you think about how small the spaces were that people lived in, the rooms were tiny, that having a quilt frame spread out for any longer than absolutely necessary was very inconvenient. And in New England, there is no tradition, there's no architectural evidence that quilt frames are raised up and down from a pulley in the ceiling. And so that is what I have for you. If you wish to read a much more thorough description of these diaries, I would direct you to my article in the Dublin Seminar for New England Folklife Proceedings from 1999.
Nice and concise and lots
No,
of
Very interesting.
data. I loved it.
thank you.
Lynn, is there any evidence of architecturally in the South or anywhere else about raising the frame? Yes.
Yes, I think it's a regionalism that we just don't see in New England.
Mm.
Sometimes it's been stated that there was, but people, I've talked to architectural historians about this and gotten the scoop. People are misunderstanding hooks that are in the ceiling for hanging bed curtains.
Mm.
They're not for quilt frames, they're for bed curtains.
Mhm.
I, as many of you know, have spent a lot of time with another New England diary that had not surfaced until before, by the time Lynn was working on hers. And when I tallied up her 20 years in Connecticut and later in what she called New Connecticut, which was the Western Reserve of Ohio, same exact, pretty much the same exact graph occurred. You could just see that the same rhythm where this was 1801 to 1821, and more quilting before her marriage for sure, and going to her various friends' houses to help with quiltings, and often not a party, just people coming over to spend the afternoon quilting after they'd done their chores. So not everything was a quilting bee or a quilting party or a quilting. Some of it was just, I went over to so-and-so's and I helped her quilt. And same
That's
trend you showed.
That's something that I didn't think I had time to, but I'll say real quickly here that, the term quilting bee never shows up. It's always a quilting party or a frolic, or just a quilting.
Just a quilting.
A
Yep.
quilting. It's much, much more common that, it's a neighbor or a sister or a mother or somebody who comes over. It's not the full-blown party.
Yep.
And the parties actually in my diaries really fell off in the 19th century.
Oh.
Really, I mean, significantly fell off in the 19th century, which I think is one of the reasons that they became viewed with such nostalgia
Yeah.
already by the mid 19th century. But that's
Yeah.
a whole nother lecture.
When does the term quilting bee show up?
I don't know when exactly, but I believe it's by the around about the third quarter of the 19th century. It's definitely after the period I was
yeah.
studying.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I've seen it in the 1850s, like in
Yeah.
Godey's or something.
Yeah, could be.
Does that sound about right?
Throw a study on that.
What?
The know-it-all should throw a study on when the.
Okay, you know what?
It was
I'm gonna look
probably
it up
Ruth
in the,
Finley. Probably Ruth Finley.
I'll go look it up in the newspaper archives, and by the time we do the recording, I'll have a follow-up
be
for
good.
you all.
That'll be good.
Okay.
One thing I love is the nostalgia during the 1850s and 60s for old-fashioned quilting. And you
Yeah.
certainly see it during the Civil War at the fairs that raise money.
Yeah.
One feature would always be an old-fashioned New England quilting with people dressed in outrageous bonnets and looking
Yeah.
colonial.
That was one of the images that I showed that was derived from the tribute book, which was a depiction of the quilting bee that was at the Metropolitan Fair. I think the reenactment of an old-fashioned quilting bee.
I have a question about harvesting. You mentioned haying in both the 18th and the 19th centuries. And it seemed like in the 19th century, there wasn't much use for women or obligation for women in the to do as much gathering in of other crops. I mean, did women not take part in the other farming activities except for dairying that you mentioned?
It's not even so much that they were involved with the haying, but that they had to feed the haying crews.
Oh,
And
Mhm.
so they were getting up early and baking 30 pies before everybody else was up and
Okay.
stuff like that. So even if they weren't actually out there, you know, scything hay and stacking it, they had to feed everybody,
Uh-huh.
all the extra hands that came along.
Right. And after the harvest, just in general, September, October, that's when it does seem to soar, the quilting. Yeah, in those 2
Mhm.
months. Yeah, that sounds like New England.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm next. I'm Barbara Brackman, and I've been writing popular history about quilts for about 40 years. My favorite book that I've ever done is the Encyclopedia of Peace Quilt Patterns, mainly because it shows how nuts I am. I love categorizing things, and I love women's history, and quilts are a wonderful way to illuminate it. My latest interests are women working as quilt makers to support themselves, the professional quilt maker, and the other is style. I have a really good visual memory, which I have used a lot to analyze how the aesthetic choices people made. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, the quilt behind me. And I'm going to do my share screen here. So have patience while I find it. And do my slideshow. So that's when we're going to air this. The quilt behind me is a top, not very well made. It's very lumpy. I had to sort of pin it together to get it to hang flat there. It's really not well made, as you can see. But it is quite early. I think there's a lot of chintzes in it. I think it's, somewhere 1830s, 40s, 50s. Mary Kay was with me when I bought this, but she doesn't remember. But I remember it very well because I love the quilt top so much. We were in Chicago for probably a quilt conference, and we went to an antique store and we saw this, and I wanted to buy it. I have no memory of what I paid for it, but the dealer told me it was an African-American quilt. Well, Mary Kay and I both bristled because our friend Questa Benberry had trained us well that you cannot assume a badly made quilt is made by African-American people. It's bigoted and it's not historically reasonable. So we said, oh no, and explained that to this woman. And then she told us, she said, you girls really need to learn more about quilt history. I suggest you read. Now, Mary, I can't believe you can't remember that. I paid my, $30 and we left, and that was it. And I still have it. I have mounted it so it just to keep it a little bit square. But I want to talk about the style here. It's always been mysterious to me. I assumed right from the beginning it was not an African-American quilt. It has quite a big range of fabrics, in style, and quite a few purples and pinks, and also a lot of dress prints. Some of you textile or dress historians would recognize some of those stripes as being, I don't know, 1830s. You guys can tell me. Also, the format is very interesting. I would call it a medallion because I'm an American, but I do believe it's a British frame quilt, which is a different style. And then I remembered I had another British frame quilt when I was thinking about this. Now I've sold the one on the right. Terry Thompson and I own that. And I buy these things because I can make fabric lines out of them, although I've never used this one yet. So what do these things have in common, and why do I think they're British? One thing is the medallion frame format. The other is the colors. So that's what we're going to talk about here. Neither of these are what I would call masterpiece quilts. These are utilitarian. But the interesting thing about aesthetics is that people are so involved in the quilters, are so involved in the way the quilt is going to look, that they can make the most utilitarian thing really become a work of art. The frame idea is very widespread in the British Isles. Now, we do medallion quilts here, especially in the early years, but we had a real tendency to forget the format after the 1840s, when we got so involved in applique blocks and other kinds of patchwork blocks, and we sort of abandoned the whole idea of a chintz quilt that was all blended. We were much more interested in red and greens that really stood out. And I think that probably is our German, our Pennsylvania German, our other German heritage, in which our melting pot kind of combines English traditions with German. But let's go back to England. These are two English quilts. And I want to point out the similarities between this one and my two. And one of the things that I find a very good clue, not a fabulous clue, but a good clue to an English medallion or an English frame quilt is the use of these rectangles and squares for borders. You notice in this one, that's what she uses for pattern. It's just rectangles and squares. In mine, there first is a field here of patchwork, and then she goes into rectangles and squares. Now, where she got these, I don't know. Are they the cabbage, the leftovers from dressmaking? Are they samples? Did she buy them in these shapes? Or did she have them left over in these shapes? But you see much, much more of this kind of frame in the British quilts than you do in the American. And here we have it again in these two British quilts. Sort of a brickwork idea. It's not a smoking gun, but certainly British people favored this as the borders far more than Americans did. Another clue to me is the color scheme, especially the purples. And there's an aesthetic, which I'm going to go back and show you these again, an aesthetic here that really emphasizes a pastel palette. I mentioned the Pennsylvania Germans, all the red and green that we were so fond of. You do see turkey red in British quilts, but that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool. The combination of the pinks and purples is a distinctive kind of British color scheme. And so I really do feel when I see this that it's a good chance that the quilt might be British, no matter where you find it. Now, the purple, I think, was quite available in England. Now, it was available in the United States too, but much more so in England. And what you find is quite a few mentions to the man, Hoyle, Thomas Hoyle, who, excuse me, I'm gonna go back here, Thomas Hoyle, who really was the sort of the inventor, I have to keep moving things over here, but the inventor of Hoyle's purple or Hoyle's lilac. I think that the color is based on madder. It's not very reliable. You can see it's browning out here, and collectors know that if you expose purples to light, you're going to start getting these brown patches that just keep expanding. Hoyle's purple was patented in 1831 and became quite the thing for middle class clothing, and actually the clothing of the poor. And here we have in 1860 someone advising that a girl should have 3 dresses, and we're talking cotton dresses, I assume here. Hoyle's lilac prints are the best. Why? I don't know. They faded, but they were inexpensive, and I think it marked class. You know, Britain is such a class-conscious society, and housemaid's purple was another reference to this. So you will see so much purple in these quilts because they had so much of it, but also they liked it. I mean, it's an aesthetic choice again, and girls wore purples and pinks. In the United States, girls wore pinks, and I'm sure they wore purples too, but you just don't see this combination. So towards the end of the 19th century, this whole idea of housemaids and poor people and lower middle class people dressing in purple calico became frumpy, became country, bumpkinish. Even in the United States, both these references I have here, which are from magazines at the end of the century, really are disparaging the whole idea of a purple calico dress. It was old-fashioned. And so in the United States, I don't think it was it was ever as popular as it was in England, because nobody in the United States wants to be looked at as a lower class. We're all equal, but in England you accepted your position and you wore purple. So that's my guess as to why there's so much purple in these British quilts. Now, these are weak. How to determine whether a medallion quilt is British or American is tough. I really like it when you know who made it and she signed it. And these are two that we pretty much think of as American. There's a stronger use of color in the American quilts. There's a lot more brown. And I think that would be more the standard color for American poor people too, would be brown calicos. But you do see purples and pinks in them too. So that I'm sort of throwing that out there in front of the costume historians and seeing what you guys might think. Stop my share.
Well, that's really interesting. I never thought of purple as in those terms, but now I'm going to have to go down a rabbit hole and see what kind of purple calicos I can find in American collections. What do you think, Lynn?
Oh, mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing, that I'm going to have to look into that when I get into collections now. I don't think there are a lot of surviving purple dresses that early.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because they did fade out and get unattractive so quickly. But if I could send us down a different rabbit hole, I have a question about that quilt that Barbara showed that had the whole randomness going on around it in one of the interior frames, and wondering if anybody would consider that to be a regionalism. You know, we started talking about random quilts in a previous Six Know-It-Alls presentation, and then we were talking about it amongst ourselves in the past week. And that one just really struck me, and thinking about those Connecticut quilts that I started out with at one of our
Oh, yes.
stations.
Just big pieces of rectangles.
Yeah. Does anybody have any ideas of, and that's the one that's right behind you now, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Really? I mean, those are early fabrics.
are you sure that that's British and not American?
No. Oh, that's true. No, I am not.
That's what we're here to debate, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
This
mean,
is
I'm just
Barbara's
showing
take on it
you
because
why,
of her
but
feeling about her instincts about the color and the look of it.
and the
Um,
rectangles.
I'm wondering if we could throw another criteria in there to consider, that, you know, these quilts that have all this random stuff going on are American, not British.
Perhaps New England.
Perhaps.
Mm.
Yeah, when we say random, these are not random shapes. These are right angled shapes.
but
Yeah,
they're not perfectly symmetrically placed, put it
Yeah,
that
they're
way,
Right,
rectangles and
right.
squares, round, you know, and crazy quilts.
or pieced.
Right, but there's all kinds of different geometric shapes making up strips, not blocks.
Mhm.
No.
And it very well might be. I don't see a lot of new early.
Well, now that's something else we have to look out for and see if anybody out there has an idea.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that Baltimore album quilts, especially the very high style ones, had a lot more purple than you would imagine. It's all faded.
Oh,
Few times you see unfaded Baltimore albums, there's a lot of purple in them. So you've got red,
That's
green, yellow, orange, blue, and lots of purple and pink. And it's a shame because they would be, a lot of them would be so much more colorful today if only the purple had lasted.
And does the purple fade to a puce, to a kind of purple brown?
brown.
Yeah.
Brown mostly.
More tan, more reddish brown Puce is a reddish, but it's pretty strong. It's a Hershey bar wrapper.
I'm just now remembering a dress, kicking myself, why didn't I remember this earlier? But there is a late 1830s dress, late 1830s dress that I conserved actually for the Yukon collection. It has a family history, and it is this purple. It is, and that it faded to a really nasty brown.
Mm.
And it was from a family that owned a mill,
Oh, a fabric mill,
a fabric mill. Yeah.
not a grist mill.
Right. A fabric mill. I believe it was even a cotton mill, but it wasn't a calico mill. It was, I think they were making just
Great goods.
gray goods. Yeah.
Well, if you go back to Florence Montgomery at the Winter Turn, her catalog of printed and printed fabrics, she will show you a black and white picture of a chintz and say it's brown, but it was probably once purple, over and over. And then when Linda Eaton redid that catalog in color, Linda says the same thing. So just think of how much chintz, how much that was in our quilts. And what I guess I'm trying to do here is pull together several clues to a British style of medallion that is not an American style of medallion. But I just wonder what the know-it-alls say about it.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to move on. And I guess I'm the next one. I'm Debbie Cooney, and my special interest is Maryland and Pennsylvania quilts. The earlier, the better. And today I'm going to talk about two Baltimore album quilts. Okay. Rhonda McAllen and I, as part of our 2017 Uncoverings paper on Baltimore album quilts, did a section on those made for ministers working in the city of Baltimore or in pastorates nearby. We have information on 35 such quilts. Many, but not all, could be termed Baltimore albums. Quilts made for Methodist ministers comprise more than half of those discovered so far, and we are sure that many more remain to be found. In her research for her Lavish Legacies exhibition and catalog, Jennifer Goldsboro noted that Methodists made the majority of more than 300 Baltimore albums she studied, with members of German Reformed congregations being second. I'm going to compare quilts made for the minister of a German Reformed church and his wife, the only ones for a couple that we have found. Elias Heiner, who lived from 1810 to 1833, was a much-loved pastor of the First German Reformed Church at 2nd and Gay Streets in downtown Baltimore for 28 years, from 1835 to 1863. A group of his congregants made an elaborate quilt in what we are calling high-style Baltimore album, which in the 1840s still included cutout chintz plus calico. Some of its blocks were made by contributors, while others were likely purchased from professional designers. I'm going to discuss briefly just a few of these. The church in the center, the presentation block above it, the ombre urn quilt, a pern quilt down here, this horn of plenty, and these three very heavy red quilts. Mrs. Matthew Shaw and Mrs. Henry Rhodes presented a quilt to the Reverend Heiner at some sort of ceremony in December 1848. The event was reported in the Baltimore Sun. This is one of the few references to album quilts found in any Baltimore newspaper of the period. The article described the quilt as one of the most elegant and curiously wrought bed quilts ever exhibited in this city. Not only did this article give us the identity of the presenters, it also confirmed that quilts had been displayed for public viewing in previous years. Margaret Miller's central block is described in the article as a very fair representation of the church, which comparison to a line drawing shows to be true. The steeple, the tallest in town, had to be shortened to fit into the block. It held the city's clock and a fire alarm used to summon residents to help fight serious blazes. Matilda Rhodes's block, just above the church, is a double wreath with a dove holding the inked inscription plus a verse from Isaiah. It is the work of a professional designer or designers whom Goldsboro described as designer one in Lavish Legacies. This woman or group basted multi-layered flowers, fruits, and even buildings. They used a lot of bright blue rainbow prints plus red and yellow accents. This type of block is found in Baltimore albums made before 1848, but is seldom seen after 1850. Two other blocks are the work, Sophia Shaw's Grape Wreaths sits to the right of the church. It could be her own creation or bought from a professional. Her verse from Proverbs was particularly apt for a minister. The fruits of the righteousness is the tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise. Her block is dated November 5th, 1847, which indicates that the quilt's construction and finishing took many months. Two other blocks are the work of designer one, the urn of flowers and the epergne of fruit. The flower block is inscribed Friendship's Offering, while the epergne block is inked with a verse from the Song of Solomon. I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. The bold lyre and wreath is one of three on the Heiner quilt by professional designer about whom we have found nothing so far. These are very similar to the red epergne block of full blossoms, D2, and the rose wreath, D5, on Williamsburg's Langsford quilt. It's epergne, B4, and it's brown ombre urn, B5, are almost identical to those designer one's quilts on the Heiner quilt. The lyre square was contributed by Christina Gelbach, wife of George Gelbach, a partner with Reverend Heiner in real estate development, an interesting sideline for a minister. The Horn of Plenty was contributed by 16-year-old Laura Diefendorfer. This one seems to have been kitted by different hands than those of the earlier high-style blocks. These newer appliques are more tightly massed with more overlap. Two tones and ombre prints create the illusion of depths, while a bold restoration print of red, yellow, and black provides a single flower up here and the edging on the horn. But its most innovative feature is the layered leaf or paisley-shaped petal technique, which Goldsboro attributes to Mary Simon, an immigrant from Bavaria who we think worked for more established quilt makers around Baltimore. Goldsboro describes these new patterns as Mary Simon's mature style. We have found that this style first appeared around 1848, so this quilt would have been one of the earliest to show off Simon's work. 4 years later, the same German Reformed congregation produced a quilt, all cut and basted by Mary Simon with a matching border. This 1852 quilt was made for Mary Heiner, Elias's wife. It has, as Goldsboro says, a pastel palette of elaborately layered fabrics, creating complex three-dimensional compositions. She judged it to be one of the finest dozen Baltimore albums known. This is indeed a tour de force of representation and layout, with tightly massed flowers and fruits arranged in baskets, wreaths, vases, and cornucopias placed symmetrically around the quilt, around the center of the quilt. Silk and velvet, plus a lot of ink details, produce more definition. Graceful swags complete this masterpiece. 6 of the same women contributed to both Mary and Elias's quilts. Most of the signers included Bible verses, several from Proverbs 31, that praise pious women and describe their accomplishments. Surely these vases were meant to acknowledge the contribution of a wife to her husband's ministry. The dedication block is a red wicker basket, one of Simon's most popular kits. The donor, Evelyn Mason, wrote "To Mary" and a 7-line poem praising her in sentimental but affectionate terms. I don't have a photo of this one, but it is almost identical to a nearby block with its arched rim and blue bow. These blocks contain typical Simon wreaths of paisley leaf roses, velvet pansies, and 2-color leaves encircling birds, baskets, harps, and anchors. Her flowers have fewer pieces than the earlier style, but her high contrast shapes require the same or a greater level of applique. Cornucopias sit in each corner. These and a striped urn contain a symmetrical array of realistic flowers. When Baltimore churchwomen made a quilt for a minister or his wife, they seem to have used all their skills and in many cases what money they had to buy professionally kitted blocks. Rhonda and I suspect that the making of presentation quilts added to the popularity of professionally kitted blocks for ministers' quilts and Baltimore albums in general. Part 2, and some other month, we'll look at ministers' quilts to underscore, more ministers' quilts, that is, to underscore this supposition.
You know, we
Repeat that last,
posted the-
repeat
So
that
for
last conclusion, Debbie.
That I would like to do a part 2 of ministers' quilts. These are the 2 of the very best. Not all of the others are as wonderful, but many of them are, and I'd like to discuss those in another presentation.
But before that, your conclusion, what do you think? What were you-
Oh, about the difference in the designers.
Why they were, what went into making the ministers' quilts? What made, they were special, so they spent money on the kits?
Money on the kits and a great deal of time. They made them very special, and perhaps they were exhibited around the city. That one was. We found the notice in the paper before we found the quilt. So it was astounding that
Wow.
come up with one of them.
That's amazing.
Other exhibitions are not known from newspaper articles, but Dr. Dunton in his book supposes himself that they were exhibited around town. So it's not a new idea. And they do tend to be pretty spectacular. A lot of them are high Baltimore albums, not all, but a lot of them are. So we think that probably there was some sort of competition going on among church women in Baltimore from about 1846 to 1848, because that's when a good deal of them date from.
Mhm.
And we have lots from ministers of Methodist churches, and especially we think this might have been going on among Methodist women, and that's why we think there are probably a lot more out there if they haven't been used up.
Huh.
So in the same time in New England, women are making friendship quilts for ministers and that sort of thing, but nothing as spectacular as those. And
Yeah.
so, my question is, did this just happen in Baltimore? I mean, these incredibly, these masterful quilts, is it just Baltimore?
Oh, no, there certainly are others. In fact, I was just looking at 2 the other day in the Metropolitan Museum collection. Those are pretty special. There were others. A lot of them are album quilts with these various blocks, but none of them seem to be the level of Baltimore albums, but then nothing else is. I mean,
But where are those ones from?
why? Oh, all over New York, others in Virginia, I can think of, Ohio. So the use of a friendship album or sampler was very common for ministers. And they just we don't know why Baltimore just went bananas.
Yeah, but they don't rise to that level, is what you're saying.
No,
I've been working on New York albums, and there were some made for ministers and their
oh,
wives.
yes, New York, for sure.
New York, why I'm doing it is I offer it as a pattern because they're so simple. It's for beginners,
mm.
and they have
Mhm.
completely different imagery: cows, horses, cats. No acorns full
Mhm.
of fabulous flowers. No layers. I mean,
Yeah.
very few layers. And that's one of the mark there is layer after layer, plus the classical allusions
Yeah.
to the imagery.
At the
Right.
DAR Museum, we used to have a quilt camp, and the teacher of the quilt camp is I'm forgetting her name right now. It was before I was curator, so I wasn't involved in it. But she would come and take a pattern of a different designer one high style block for the kids to work on for the 2-week long camp. And there would be over 100 pieces in those blocks because of all those layers and all those flowers, all those leaves and so on. So, these are elaborate pieces. And nobody else seems to have gone as crazy. And also to get nuanced about why was it only in Baltimore? Some of these, what we're calling Baltimore albums, were being made in the environs in Maryland outside of Baltimore, and some in Western Maryland, Someone just emailed me about one that's in the Maryland album book that is actually an Eastern Shore album, and Debbie has done so much research on this. Forgive me, Debbie, I'm just going to quote you here. Debbie's only found a very few Eastern Shore albums, and this is the only one that looks as sophisticated as this particular one in the album book does. But so it was outside of Baltimore too that you see these elaborate Baltimore style ones, but we call them all Baltimore albums.
Well, unfortunately for Jennifer, the DAR's album top had not been discovered when she wrote the book. If she had seen that, I think she might have changed her mind a little bit about whether the earlier quilts and the later were made by the same people. I mean, I've asked people who has made that. You have your patterns of that top. Very few people make it because there are just too many. There are just too many pieces, and there are 25 blocks of too many pieces. I only know of about 5 or 6 people who have actually completed the whole top of all those 25 blocks.
Yeah. So a lot of the quilts, the album quilts you see will have just a couple of those blocks. And of course, you know, we assume they're being made by different women, but a lot of women asked to contribute to a project probably would have said, yeah, I'm doing a simple little rose wreath. Okay, that's all I'm up for. Thank you.
I think we have to remember too that Baltimore was an enormous port. In 1840, it was a different country because it relied on the Atlantic and the rivers that went in from the Atlantic for the economy. And so we have Boston in the north, Philadelphia, Baltimore, then down to the south to Savannah or to Charleston and Savannah. And so Baltimore was one of the top cities that would be not only a place where you could find many materials, many people, but where people went shopping.
And also what we have to remember is that, people came from all over Maryland and north of there to, to Baltimore to shop, but also there were a lot of fabric mills in Maryland at the time on the Patapsco River. And there aren't a lot of records because a lot of them were constantly being flooded by the swollen floods of the Patapsco River. But it's possible that some of those calicos and some of those prints that were being used came from some of those mills. So that's another easy source.
I'm fascinated by the fact that there are several prints that you see in Baltimore quilts, like the blue rainbows, that we can't find in any other quilts.
Right.
It's very odd.
Yeah. And yet they're found on something like, 50 different album quilts. So, and you can trace the patterns on some of these blocks, and they're basically identical with a few little vagaries of a flying pineapple here or there that didn't quite make it into the composition. So there's just no question that, somebody was producing these commercially, to go back to Barbara's theme of women doing quilting commercially.
Okay, have to move on.
All right, so I am next, and I will share my screen. Okay, hi, I am Alden O'Brien, and I have the good fortune to be curator of costume and textiles at the DAR Museum in Washington, D.C. And I am particularly proud of an exhibit that these quilts I'm going to show you today were in, Eye on Elegance, which is online and which also has a lot of album quilts in it, and an essay by Debbie about fabrics, and an essay by Virginia Viss that outlines the basics, Baltimore Album 101. And so I recommend that to you. And this is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker, Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3, the 3 that are in red here. And the 3 in yellow are crib quilts, so they're smaller. We're not going to talk about those. And all the green ones are on DAR premises because they're on loan since Nancy's exhibit There are 4 full-size ones with eagles, and there are 3 with flower baskets. And again, the red are the ones that we now own. And the circular or rectangular vines around the center motifs are a signature of Markie Garnhart, as are the use of sawtooth borders, which are a very Maryland feature. And the other feature of Garnhart's quilts is that they're all reverse applique. You might be able to see in this picture, or might not, that you can kind of see the shadow of the green fabric underneath the ground fabric there. Some of them have basic quilting. Some of them are more beautiful and elaborate, like this one. I don't even remember which one this is from. And one family's quilt was said to be quilted by the granddaughter that it was given to before her marriage. So maybe Garnhart didn't do her own quilting. So hold that thought. Garnhart had 2 sons by her first husband, David Markie, who died young. And the quilts were made for her 11 Markie grandchildren. So I like to call her Markie or Markie Garnhart, because they're really Markie family quilts. We have full-size quilts for 7 of the grandchildren, and we're not sure which grandchild went with which quilt in the case of the last 2. Here's the flower arrangements, which you can zoom into to see in really great detail in the online exhibit. Combine numerous expensive chintzes. The same chintzes and small calicos also appear in multiple quilts by Markie Garnhart. Here's a vase that you see in other Maryland quilts, like the one on the right, lower right there. Sometimes she cut them in 2 to make 2 different bouquets. And here again is the same vase in our first Garnhart quilt that we acquired. So here's the mystery that we're here to talk about. You're not seeing double. These are 2 different quilts. You can tell the one that is attributed to Markie Garnhart that is on loan to the DAR, because it has this palm tree and pheasants that you see in a lot of other quilts, including this one at the right, which is in the exhibit and in a Maryland album. It's now at the Brooklyn Museum. And wait, there's more. Actually, no, these are all the same as the Brooklyn quilt. Could it be a lost Markie Garnhart? Can we connect it to the family? Dunton recorded the earlier owner on a street that doesn't exist in Frederick, so that's a little confusing. That is Garnhart's town, but just try finding the right Mrs. Smith or her grandmother, Elizabeth Welsh, which turns out to be a fairly common Maryland name, much less connecting them to each other. Debbie and Virginia Viss and I have looked into this a lot, and we've reached a dead end. Nancy Gibson says that she thought she found a link to Markie Garnhart to this quilt, but I haven't heard more, so maybe that just didn't pan out. We don't know anymore. And here are all 3 images of the Brooklyn quilt. You can see they look very different, very similar. There are some slight deviations in the watercolor, but it was attributed to the same collector as it was in Dunton. So it's just a few artistic, imperfections. But wait, there's a third. This is faded, but it's on loan at the Smithsonian, and it's attributed to Hannah Wood of Rhode Island and later Ohio, who apparently never set foot in Maryland. Slightly different fabrics in the eagle and the border, but the layout is the same, and many of the appliques are exactly the same fabric. Oh my God, not again. But as with the Welsh quilts, these are all the same quilts being depicted in the Index of American Design, in the Peto book, and in this sketch from an antique show in Nantucket. Some of Hannah Wood's descendants ended up in Nantucket and lent the Smiths to the Smithsonian, and others are in Connecticut, and they kindly let me photograph the family album. So here's Hannah down at the bottom. So comparing the 3 quilts, the DAR, the Brooklyn, and the Smithsonian, we see the same fabrics, birds perched on top of a fruit cluster, for example, and do look up Barbara's blog posts, which go into these comparisons in much more detail than I have time for now, and they discuss the Garnhart story at greater length than I have time for. here's the same rose inside the same vine and more birds on very similar baskets. Barbara put the 3 in order here, and then she photoshopped them on top of each other, and you can see it's exactly the same layout, exactly the same placement. So what gives? Even if the Welsh is really a lost marquee quilt, no way did wood from Rhode Island and Ohio magically make a twin. So we may have to consider Barbara's theory that some of these quilts made in multiples are the product of commerce, not great granny stitching in her parlor. These all have these features that Barbara diagrams of what she calls the Garnhart school. Markie or her grandchildren may have done only the quilting, or she sewed motifs that were sold pre-basted, or maybe the fabric was marked for placement on the ground fabric. And not long after these were done, remember, Baltimore album blocks that we were just talking about, I love how our talks end up dovetailing each other, were cut and basted and sold for customers to stitch and finish. Maybe that cottage industry arose out of an existing tradition of full-size quilts like these. The border on 2 of the marquees suggests a 1840s date, even contemporaneous with the Baltimore albums, so it could just be a continuous commercial tradition. Now let's go back and compare the quilt Markie made for her oldest grandchild, who was born only a year after she was widowed and remarried Henry Garnhart, a much richer man than her first husband. This is much more folky than those others, aware of the elegant style going on nearby perhaps, but not on a par. It doesn't have the costly chintzes. These are close-ups. It's fun, but it's a very different animal. So I put it to the know-it-alls. Did Markie Garnhart make the first one herself, this one, when she couldn't afford the chintzes? One family story related that her son would buy $1 a yard chintz in Baltimore. That's a very expensive fabric. When he went there on business, supporting the original attribution of all the quilts to her. So there does seem to be an early family memory of her making quilts. In any case, this purchase of these expensive chintzes was only possible after she married her second husband. Did she start buying store-bought quilts or kits? Did she make all for herself all but that one eagle that has the twins? What does everybody think?
Oh.
We've gone round and round, Debbie and I,
Oh.
and Barbara and I.
Well, you
Well,
know,
does she have, what's her house like? I mean, does she have servants living there?
That's an excellent question. Suzanne Antipis contacted me when I was doing research for Ion Elegance, and she got bitten by this bug and went up to Frederick and did a lot of research to add to what we know about Garnhart, and I'm very grateful to her. And she found Garnhart's house on a later fire insurance map, and it's extremely narrow. I mean, these quilts are about 106 inches square, and it's really hard to imagine how you could lay it all out and say, okay, I'm going to place it all this way and so on in that tiny little house of hers. And she did not have servants in her house in the census.
and it was a slave state and she had no slaves.
Right,
She was German.
right. So she did not have a nice big house with servants or enslaved assistants, and she didn't have, when she was making these, she didn't yet have her daughters-in-law were not all that nearby. You know, maybe there was some help there and all that, but it's hard to imagine her churning out all those quilts essentially on her own.
I once saw that quilt, the one that has the reverse applique, the green.
Yeah,
Oklahoma,
No, no, the one,
Boston, or
well, if you
You showed
made
it.
to Ion Elegance, you saw 4 of them, or
Yeah.
2 of them. They were in rotation. We rotated 2 of the eagles and 2 of the flower baskets.
but what I thought of was that maybe somebody was making those units.
Yeah.
You know, they got so good at doing that reverse applique
Mhm.
with green underneath that they were making units of those. And so, you know, that could be done at home. They could be kitted, taken away back home, bring them back. I can see how one person would get expert at doing something like that and then putting it together.
Okay.
You know,
But I
what-
don't think one person put it all. I
I mean,
remember
it's
seeing
still
it
on
the
a
first
great
time.
big ground fabric.
I know, I don't.
It's still a very large ground fabric that you're talking about.
Well,
So
my
you've
hobby
got to place all of those vines on a very large piece of fabric that's got to be spread out.
my hobby horse lately has been this idea of commercial quilt making workshops. And
Exactly.
it was Garnhart that got me started. You know,
Ah.
my friend Bobby Finley made a copy. We discussed how could you make so many,
Yeah.
you know, and she was working. I did a lot of research on it too. As I recall, they owned some kind of a business, and she ran it. These
A
were
sawmill. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like a mill or something.
Yeah.
These were
Sawmill.
not rich people, and you would, I mean, you just start going. What did this woman do when her first husband died? How
Mhm.
did she support herself? I think she inherited the first husband's business, but then she had to run it. So
Well, the first
It-
husband was actually in debt quite a lot to her second husband. So marrying the second husband, who was almost old enough to be her father,
oh,
kind of wiped out the debt and took away some of that anxiety and helped her to keep on running that business. But
well, I think she's a
you know,
perfect
I just
model for someone who was a good organizer, or she bought those quilts from someone else who was a good organizer. But we
Mm.
don't see them in other families for the most part, and I don't think she could have afforded them at first. So
well, going
I
into
look
the
at her as
1820
who ran some kind of a sewing workshop.
going into the 1820s and 30s, she could have afforded it because that's when the quilts seem to date 1830s-ish. You know, a lot of those chintz borders are from, and that's when she had, you know, Garnhart's money, and the kids would have been grown by then, and she would have had a little bit more time, but except that she's still running that business, although one of the sons is helping take that over. So, you know, there's a timeline there to take into account, but I don't know how you account for that eagle one. I mean, maybe all but that one eagle were indeed her own production. She has to have had some kind of help with it. But that eagle, there's no way that eagle in Ohio, you know, didn't come from, you know, the same place. And it wasn't Garnhart.
Well, on the other side, there is still that quilt in the family. It's a magnificent mariner's compass of about 25 blocks with a lavish Baltimore style chintz border. And I think it also has sawtooth. So, and beautifully quilted. And the family still has that. And it's
Yep.
beautifully done. I mean, it's gorgeously quilted. So somebody there in Frederick, whether she had help or not, was a terrific quilt maker.
Right, right.
And that would explain the Elizabeth Welsh quilt in Brooklyn, where we try as we might, we cannot find a connection, because Elizabeth Welsh might have shopped in Baltimore, or someone did for her,
Yeah.
and bought a luxury item as a gift and took it back.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, you know, I can't remember where that eagle quilt that is the twin was in the chronological lineup. I'm flipping through now to look at that again.
Well, and
But-
Doris Bowman at Smithsonian told me that she had seen another one at an antique show and
Oh,
had
right.
attempted to find out more about it, and the dealer never got back to her. So there's another one out there, at least one more out there that we
Oh,
know.
God, isn't that tantalizing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just looked up the eagle, and the eagle that has the twins is one of the later ones. So maybe she was getting tired, but then the other two were for later grandchildren. But, you know, they weren't necessarily given to the grandchildren at birth. Maybe they were given to the grandchildren as they got married. You know, someone who enjoys quilting or putting together quilts or whatever, maybe, you know, doing it continuously and as someone reaches marriageable age, they're like, oh, here, have one of the quilts I already made. I don't know. You know, it's sort of speculative, but it's just
And one
an
more
interesting
link here
mystery.
between our talks is that she lived in Frederick, which is close to Baltimore. And Debbie and Rhonda have established very clearly to me that it
Yep.
was a professional quilt making going on in the 1840s
Yep.
in Baltimore. So
So that's what I'm suggesting,
Yeah.
is that maybe what was going on with the albums, you know, goes back 10 or 20 years and could have been the source for Garnhart.
Yep. Okay, and we're out of time for this one.
Okay, I think I'm up.
Julie. Yeah.
Hi. Let me start by sharing my screen. And come on. There we go. I'm Julie Silver, and I love everything to do with old quilts. And I've been in love with them for a very long time, and delighted to be among the other know-it-alls, and hoping to contribute what I can. And I'm interested in a quilt that we don't see very many of, called tile quilts. And I want to talk about them and tell you how my interest in them started. In the 1970s, I had a shop in Northern California with my partner, Linda Ruther. And Linda went to New York, where we sold folk art and particularly specializing in antique quilts. And Linda went on a trip to New York and came home with this quilt. And I think she got it from Kelter Malsay, one of the major folk art dealers in New York in the early days. I'm pretty sure that's where she got it. She brought it home, and it was so unique. We'd never seen anything like it, and wondered about it, and just tried to keep our eyes open and ask people about it, and so on. What we noticed first was its similarity to crazy quilts, in that there are random shapes, and in the last quilt, random shapes in every alternate block. So random shapes, that is to say, not recognizable geometric shapes, and sometimes shapes that were representational. Another late Victorian crazy quilt, random shapes. Random shapes in a 20th century quilt with made of cottons. And these random shapes in, again, an early 20th century wool quilt. But what is it that distinguishes the random shapes in tile quilts from these others? And where did it come from? So one of the things that we noticed along the way a bit later was that there are these English, mid 19th century English quilts that have these random shapes that are kind of floating on a background. And here you're looking at one that's dated 1845 and a detail. That was English, and this was made in Massachusetts by a woman who was born in Ireland. So it has kind of a similar look to these shapes floating around on the background, appliqued onto the background. And here in the United States, later, we see a kind of random, these random shapes that are floating around. And so how are those things related to tile quilts, and why are they not tile quilts? And here's the reason. One word, grout. So tile quilts appear to be random shaped pieces appliqued to a white ground or a lighter ground, leaving just enough space between them to resemble grout or mortar in a tile, mosaic, or whatever you might think of pieces put together but not quite touching. So let's look at some that we have found. This one is at the Shelburne Museum, and they call it Streets of Boston. It was made by two young sisters for their older sister. whose initials were EMK or R, I can't remember, K, I think. And it's dated in applique numbers 1873. And there's the grout. This one is it may be a year earlier. So I'm trying to put them in order of the earliest ones we know of. That last one was 1873 as dated on the quilt. And this one at Michigan State University Museum that is cited in a letter that was attached to the quilt as having been made in 1872. And it was a woman describing, it wasn't the woman who made the quilt, but it was cited as having been made in 1872. And just as an aside, the quilt was given to somebody who lived in Paw Paw, Michigan. And the reason that the donor, the gifter, gave it to that person was because, and she put the name Paw in there. And then I don't know if you can see it, I outlined it, but it's kind of she played a little joke on us. It says Paw, and then I outlined what was a hand. So Paw, Paw, you know, but this one is dated 1900, and it's at the IQM, International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, and they have it as probably Connecticut. And we'll see that Connecticut comes up quite a few times as we look at tile quilts. This one's unusual in that it is, instead of being made in blocks, it's an all over tile quilt where you can see that, and you'll notice that what's important is that these pieces are cut and laid on in such a way that there really is a kind of standard width of this grout or background fabric, rather than the pieces floating around with different spaces between them. This is a very interesting one, and let me see if I can move this so that I can read it. Okay. The Ohio History Connection found this quilt made by Arilla Morton Steinhelfer, who lived between 1861 and 1940. And although the quilt is not dated, we can date it at 1905 because this unusual crazy applique memory quilt was made in 1905 by Arilla Morton Steinhelfer from scraps of dresses made for her daughter, Daisy Pearl. Both mother and daughter are buried in the Biddle Cemetery near blah, blah. This very graphic, unusual design quilt preserves a good selection of fabrics from 1888, 1885 to 1905. The daughter died in 1905, and according to the donor, this was made of scraps of the daughter's fabric, and so would date to about 1905. The Connecticut Quilt Search Project found several of these, and with most of, and they have Connecticut associations. This one was documented as in the Zachariah Ferris family. They were Quakers, and it was documented in Sherman, Connecticut, very close to the New York border. And the family itself called this Stonewall. And as Sue Reich, who helped me with this a little bit, and I thank her very much, said, the stone walls in 19th century stone walls in Connecticut were ubiquitous. And so it would make sense in some way that quilts made like this that resemble stone walls would be called Stonewall. And you'll notice here that unlike most of the others, this one has a border of 9 patches set on point on 3 sides. This was also made apparently in Connecticut and discovered by the Connecticut Quilt Search Project. It's unusual in that it's set on point, and the many, many dark pieces make it a little bit more dramatic than some. This one, which is at IQM in Lincoln, was made by a member of the Burdick family, they believe for Hattie Burdick, whose name is appliqued in the close to the center. And the museum records show that it was, quote, probably made in New London, Connecticut. They date it as 1876 to 1900, but that's an estimation based on fabrics, I think. This has an unusual border, even though borders are kind of unusual to begin with. This is applique, it's machine applique, and it's a vining border. This is in Williamsburg, and has, as I think you can see, it has some animals in it and some representation. If there's a horse and a man and a dog and a and a ha-ha. This is the only wool example found to date. All of them so far are cotton, and all of them that we have found are bed size. That is to say, they're different sizes, but they're big. They're not small quilts until we get to the 20th century. And this one has especially narrow, they're placed very close together. Documented by the Oregon Quilt Project, this is at the Latimer Quilt and Textile Center in Tillamook, Oregon, and it's a friendship quilt. All but one of the blocks is signed in embroidery, and their records show, and this would be, you know, somebody guessing 1850 to 1875, and they actually have dated it 1850. There's no reason to think that it's that early, but that's what somebody thought. Here's one I found somewhere. I don't even remember where, but it reminds me, let me go back here for a second if I can. This is set apart, as you can see, in strips, and has a, it's a little bit more liberal in its grouting and how it's placed. It almost has a Matisse look, or maybe we should say Matisse had this look. And this one has sort of a similar feel to it, with the curves and so on. This one is mine, and is extremely carefully made. It's originally, I got it from Gabby Burkert's estate. She was a collector here in California and was able to purchase this quilt at some point. And let's look at some details here. This person was incredibly careful. It almost looks like it's bias tape, bias tape that's been appliqued around the pieces, but that's not so. It's just like every other one we've seen, it's appliqued down onto white, showing the background in this standard way. In the book of where this quilt was shown, which is called American Quilt Masterpieces, or something like this, this was, Gabby Burkert chose this as her masterpiece quilt. At that time, they called it Stained Glass Window. They probably had, at the time the book was published. And it says it was made by Edith Montgomery in Hood River, Oregon, circa 1870. And that all sounds like a guess. It would be very interesting to find that the quilt was made in Oregon if it really was made in Oregon. And there's some indication that it might have been. Most of them were made in the northeastern United States, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later. Coming into the 20th century, these are quilts that have not been published. These next two belong to me. This is a smallish quilt. It's maybe something like, I don't know, 40 by 60 or something like that, maybe a little bit smaller. And it's a 20th century quilt, as I don't have any history on it, but as obviously dated by the fabrics. And it's in 4 pieces. I wonder now that I think about it, whether it's those are completed pieces like what we would call a potholder quilt. And then the last one I'm going to show you is a fragment that I bought off the internet. The person didn't know anything about it. It's cut on the top and on the side. I don't know how big it was originally or why it might have been cut, but it's a contained example, meaning that the blocks are all separated by, again, and the pieces are separated by white, and the blocks are separated by wider white borders. Let me show you a detail here. And you can see that this too is 20th century, probably closer to about 1930s, 1940s, and maybe even to the 50s now that I look at closely at the fabrics. So here, what do we know? We know that there are several names given to the quilt. Tile, which is the most common name to which it is referred. Stonewall in Connecticut, where there are several examples have been found, some of them named that by the family. It's also sometimes called mosaic or puzzle or cobblestone, or in the case of the one I showed at the beginning, Streets of Boston. Origins, there are documented quilts from Connecticut. The others seem to be, most of them from the Northeast US, with the exception of the Michigan quilt, which may have been a gift to Michigan, we don't know, and the quilt that is said to be from Oregon. They're cotton, the ones we have found. There's only one wool example. And let me go back here, because now I don't know. And I don't know what that last thing was, but I maybe you guys could see it. In any case, there we go. And we, as Lynn indicated, we had some conversations about what's a crazy quilt, what's a tile quilt. And I've given a name to the ones where they are appliqued on a background, but there's no standardized grout. And I just gave a name of freeform applique because that's what it looks like to me. And I thought that was descriptive of it. So there you go, folks. Let's see what you guys have to say.
Well, I'm fascinated that these appear, correct me if I'm wrong, right about the same time as the crazy quilts start coming up.
Yes, yes.
So they're taking an idea and going in different directions with it, but still very related, similar aesthetic. I just find that fascinating.
And yet a completely different way of making it,
Right.
because the crazy quilts are foundation piece, right? And then this is everything cut out very carefully on the background. I wasn't sure initially until you got to the Oregon example and the one after it where there were a lot more spaces. I thought that people were literally putting, you know, borders around it. And I was thinking, oh my God, who would do that? But no, they're just cutting it very carefully. So, and fitting the pieces very carefully so that you have a very even grout all the way around it. And that makes much more sense. But some of them did a better job than others with that, or simply choose to be a little bit more freeform.
Yeah, let me say here, before I forget, that I want to thank both Sue Reich, who helped me with this, and also Bobby Finley, who with Carol Jones have written a book on how to make tile quilts with an interesting history at the beginning of it. I talked to Bobby the other day, and she said that she had found 35 to date, more than she had when the book was published. And I sent her the 2 20th century ones that I just showed you, which she had not known about. So I presume that brings it to 37, at least from Bobby's research, and I thank her very much.
And we are out of time. Okay.
Hello, my name is Mary Kay Waldvogel, the last of the know-it-alls today. And I've written about a lot of eras of quilt history, but my favorite era is mid-20th century. This book, Soft Covers for Hard Times, was a book that I wrote in 1990, 30 years ago. And I particularly liked it because it was directed by myself. I could do what I wanted to do. And I interviewed a lot of people and used a lot of ephemera. One of the chapters is about cotton sacks. I call them cotton sacks. Today, a lot of people call them feed sacks. And this picture is one of my favorite pictures in the book. And I'd like to revisit this because there are some things in it that have some mixed messages. Being a know-it-all, well, we don't know it all. And sometimes I try really hard to make sure everything is absolutely correct in a picture. And this one, for example, was meant to be a collage of various feed sacks and flour sacks. And then we asked the photographer's assistant to put a dress on that was made from feed sacks, along with the apron. Perfect. I just love this picture. But in fact, Not every item in this picture is Depression era, as soft covers for hard times is supposed to cover. And not every item is a feed sack, but hey, it's a good photo. So I want to revisit this and enjoy this aspect of the 20th century. One of the earliest articles I found about the use of flour sacks was this one in 1929, Good Housekeeping magazine. Curiously, it's not a country woman that's the focus here. It's a woman, an urban woman in very 1920s style dress. And she has equipped her house with many things from flour sacks, including a broom cover, a pot holder, her apron, her curtains, etc. And this article suggests that you could get your flour sacks from a bakery that has them on hand and will sell them to you for just a few cents. Rip the sack. The material measures 36 by 42 inches, which is about the size of a 100-pound flour sack, maybe a, they were getting sugar sacks there too. And then they go on and talk about how you can remove the print, the trademark print from the white sack. And finally, it talks about the fact that sack cloth is particularly suitable for quilts. Simply dye half the material in a desired shade for the quilt. So it's basically white and one shade. They're solid fabrics, all made from a flour sack from the bakery. This quilt is made like that. It was a Drunkard's Path quilt, originally dyed with red Putnam fadeless dye. Obviously, it has faded to this beautiful coral color. The quilt maker used a sack on the back, and you could still see the remains of a trademark. Again, probably just a black trademark on the sack. And when I turned it around with a mirror, I think it reads Gold Medal Flower. Here's the quilt maker, Viola Sanders Webb of Keltonburg, Tennessee. And in 1934, she entered this quilt in a category at the State Fair for quilts made from cotton sacks, and she won. She also won in 1936. I was referred to her because she was an expert, obviously, and a prize winner of quilts using sacks. And so I talked to her a long time about the sacks and her use of them. And in that book, there's a several page dialogue or interview with her. And she talks about some really wonderful things about sacks in particular. One thing that surprised me was the fact that I asked her about the printed sacks like this. At the time, I didn't have an actual word to describe these. And I called them, you call them flour sacks, and yeah, they're flour sacks, but I meant to describe the print. And sometimes I called them flour D, but these aren't. So anyway, I asked her about it, and she said, oh, I got those at the mill, like a little grist mill down the road, and we paid for them. So this is not unlike that Good Housekeeping article asking or encouraging the readers to go to a bakery and get sacks and use them for a second, in a second way. And she said that in fact, she couldn't remember even using these print sacks until much later, late 1930s or even into the 40s. These actually look like they might be 50s or even 60s. So she piqued my interest, and I decided to do some more interviews, and I even called the president of this company in Nashville, Worthen Bag Company. It's a very old factory, very old business, and they produced sacks for commodities. So this is a cotton sack company. They're probably there. They've gotten the cotton has come in, the raw cotton, they're spinning it, they're making it into fabric, but they also had a print shop there. And I talked to the president, and he told me that when those flowery sacks came in, that they had a crew of artists, because there was so much interest in those dress prints fabrics that they had to keep up. They had to keep a new supply going all the time. So the picture on the left is in 1940. The picture on the right is 1989. I took just about when the factory itself closed down completely. At this point, it was a paper sack company just printing on paper sacks. So when it closed, I was contacted and invited to come and choose anything from their collection of sacks and even some of their printing materials. I didn't take it all, but I chose some that I thought would tell the history a little bit of sacks and the history in particular of this company. So here's the logo in the center, Worthen Bags. The rooster is on their logo most of the time. Now, there were companies all over the country that were cotton sack companies, cotton bag companies. Each one had a logo. Each one was competing for the business from flour mills. This one very conveniently dated each sack, and there's a number under the logo, and here it says 1231, which he said referred to December 1931. And I like these two also because it shows how far this sack company reached. They sold in Kansas, they sold in Colorado. Also on these sacks at the bottom, in the unusual lettering, it says 24 pounds on the left, and that sack on the right is a 48-pound sack. Those amounts refer to the original size of a barrel that held the commodities. So when they would get away from the barrels and begin to use cloth, was of course lighter, easier to move around, they did keep the amounts that were traditional. However, in 1943, across the country, all the weights were standardized to 5, 10, 25, and 50-pound bags. And you can see it here in this example. It's a 50-pound plain flour bag. And notice the logo, and underneath it is the print, December 1968. Now, interestingly, this is 1968. It's a white sack with a multicolored trademark on it, red, white, and blue. They don't have, this is not in a flowery print yet. But Worthen Bag did have what they called dress print bags. And this is the word I hope we use in the future, dress print bags. This is a little booklet on the right. I don't own this, but it's a little booklet that says "So Easy with Worthen Bags." And Worthen Bag was not the first to produce dress print bags, but in fact, that credit goes to Percy Kent Bag Company, who introduced it in 1937, who came up with this idea of making the cloth on the back look like dress fabric. What the little bag you see here is just a tiny sample bag. It's very tiny. And on the left, you see an advertisement in a trade magazine for flour companies. And Percy Kent Bag Company in 1947 is appealing to their flour customers, their flour mill customers, by saying, you have to pay for a container. Why not one that smart housewives can reuse? And this is 1947, just after the war. And not until after World War II ended did these dress print sacks really take off. So these are not Depression era items that we usually associate with. In fact, there were all kinds of idea books, suggestions on how to use cotton sacks, from everything from dresses and aprons to toys, curtains, all kinds of things. And then the National Cotton Council out of Memphis even provided dresses, or had dresses made up from cotton sacks to be used for fashion shows at state fairs. And you could rent this set of dresses for those events. And isn't she cute? right there with her, her cotton sack and the dress that is made from it. And I think it's very close to the sack fabric that I own here on the left. These three are from my collection, and these are the kinds of what we call, what a lot of people today are calling feed sacks. They're in a lot of these discussion groups, I hear questions about, are they authentic? Can you find the holes where the seams were along the edges? And they are interested in whether they were just printed as fabric, dress fabric. Therefore, they often look at the weave, the density of the weave. These are in fact authentic feed sacks. Are actually feed sacks, and they're with dress print fabrics. So what do we do here? Well, really in this photo, we've got salt, we've got chicken feed, we've got cane sugar, we got flour, and we've got cow feed, dairy cow feed. The starred ones are from the 1920s to the 30s. The dress print sacks and the house dress are really from the 1940s to the 60s. Call them cotton sacks or cotton bags. Call the printed fabric feed sack fabric if you want to, but know that they were originally called dress print bags. Thank you.
I think you're going to have as much success getting people to call them dress print bags as I do getting people to stop calling whole cloth wool quilts linsey woolsey.
And as much as Deborah Craik has had success in getting people to stop calling things cheater cloth and call them printed patchwork. But we can try, we can carry that
try.
banner for you. And I'm fascinated because, of course, I've always, you know, I've never really paid much attention to those because it's sort of past the DAR's collecting period. And so I haven't got much exposure to them. But I always kind of sort of thought they did start in the Depression. And I think that's a common misconception. So you've just busted another myth. Hooray.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really feel pretty sure about that.
Yeah, no, very clearly. Yeah.
Mary Ann Montgomery, I need to give her a plug, with this book, Cotton and Thrift, she really went into, she found the patent, 1937, and she did a lot more research, again, with newspapers, especially during the 40s. This was a time where they were really needing to get, well, the cotton industry was in bad straits, and this was a huge opportunity for them to be the sole supplier of cotton to this industry. So it's another interesting part of the story.
So Mary Kay, I just want to be clear here and make sure that our viewers are clear as well. You're saying that 1937 or just before is when these were printed. So when people say it's a 1920s quilt and look at it, it's all full of feed sack.
That's wrong.
It's wrong.
Unless, I mean, when they're talking about dress print fabrics, that's after 1937. But there certainly were quilts, like you saw in that Good Housekeeping one. They would be white background, and there would be trademarks on them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were multicolored, and sometimes they were really interesting designs on them, but it was not a repeated fabric. What else can I call it? I mean, I think
A fashion fabric.
a fashion fabric, that's a good word too.
You know,
Yeah.
the idea of recycling white cotton or linen feed sacks is very old.
Yes.
In Lawrence, Kansas, when we first settled here, we were very poor, and we solicited clothing from New England. And one of the jokes was that the men walked around with a flour on their butts because they were making their clothing out of recycled linen sacking. And
Yeah.
that's 1854.
I'm reading a really good book right now, The Fashion People. Have you heard of this, Fashionopolis?
Mm-mm.
No.
It is a fascinating book. All of us would like this. It's about what's happening right now with sustainable fashion, essentially is what it is. And the waste that's involved in the fashion industry
Yeah.
is just outrageous. And a lot of
Yeah.
young people are starting businesses trying to be as efficient as they can and reuse. And essentially that's what this industry was doing back in the,
Recycling.
is recycling, reusing, finding many uses for one piece of manufactured cloth.
Hey, Mary Kay, can you tell us about the quote behind you?
Well, I just pulled it out of my group. And it is, on the back of it is a, they're not bead sacks, they're all sugar sacks.
Mm.
And they're from California and Hawaii,
And
CNH
that's the
sugar.
foundation fabric?
It's all yes. So it's all foundation piece. And it's, there's a copyright date on it, 1939. But again, you know, it's just white cloth with trademarks on it.
Yeah.
I put this up here because I thought we would be talking more about random shaped quilts. And I think this is a great example of somebody just picking up stuff off, you know, the table or off the floor of scraps and just putting it together. But there is a little bit of rhyme or reason to it. So
I have one thing to say. As a member of the people who produce cotton, linen, wool, and silk compost, you can throw them in the trash and they will not be there forever. I cannot speak for polyester, but Moda does not make polyester.
Mhm. Well, and also we should all be wearing fewer things. We should be buying good quality and wearing them out. And the fast fashion thing has got to end if we're going to.
Of course, we're the
be more
age to
sustainable.
advise 25-year-olds exactly what they should be wearing. Over the past year, haven't we learned that you can get by with 4 outfits and 6 pair of pants?
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for that recommendation of Fashionopolis. I am definitely going to pick that up.
I mean, it goes back to Manchester in England too. I mean, it's really a cool book. And
yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. But thank you also for giving me more ammunition when invariably this meme cycles around on Facebook with that advertising picture of the fellow with all the sacks. And it says that manufacturers developed these dress print bags out of charity for the people in the Depression to help them clothe themselves.
As if they did it out of the goodness of their hearts.
Right.
We all
And
know how kind and loving corporations are.
Yeah, I made the mistake of trying to correct that once, and I got shot down for being just, I don't know, somehow I was against clothing for children.
All right.
well, I'll probably get struck into it.
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
Now we'll open it to the audience.
Yes.
Okay.
Join us in a few minutes for a live Q&A if you're seeing this on July 14th. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate you being here. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
And the other thing I want to say is that I was fortunate enough to have a Mennonite mother-in-law. And she was raised in a very traditional Kansas Mennonite community. She was born in 1917. So when I first read this myth, I thought, here's my opportunity. So I said to her, you know, I've heard that Mennonites make a deliberate error in their quilt so as to appear humble before God.
And thanks to the work of Gee's Bend quilters, as well as scholars and collectors, many of them, the term improvisational quilts has come to be associated with African-American quilters from the Deep South through Texas and even to California.
You know, that's why I think one of the questions was, well, shall we throw out Ruth Finley? I mean, no. We all, I think, relate to Ruth Finley and where, you know, where she was in 1929 and where we are today. And I think we really want people to keep looking at the quilts, keep digging, reviewing some of these records. Like Alden, I really wonder if that quilt, that Baltimore album quilt, has machine applique on it. Woo!
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4,
Oh, hurry up.
3, 2, 1.
Hello. Okay. Hello. Hi.
10, 9, 8, 7,